The Panasonic Lumix S1H is one of the most powerful hybrid/DSLR style cameras ever made. I mean, there is a reason that this is one of the first of its kind to be Netflix approved for like image quality, which is a pretty strenuous test to get on that list. Like, it's no small feat that this hybrid camera that does take pictures, it does stills, has been approved on that list. So what are the best tips and tricks that I've been using to get the most out of the S1H? Let's find out. What's up everyone? I'm the Everyday Dad, and if I can figure it out, you can figure it out. So no kidding, I'm a big fan of this camera. Like we're shooting on the GH5. The GH5 is one of my favorite cameras of all time, but the S1H has really been impressing me with its image quality, its ease of use, and just the overall functionality of this camera can't be beat. Like there's very few, I mean, I've never used a Very camera in EVO 1. This thing's a beast. So let's go through what I really like about this camera. And to start it off, let's go with something that's so simple. It's so incredibly simple, but it's insanely powerful. And that's the display here. So if you see, can you see the display? The coolest feature here is you can hit the display button until you bring up this menu. Now you may be looking at this and you can now see everything that the camera's doing. You can see your shutter angle, not shutter speed, shutter angle. This is very video centric. Your iris, not your aperture, your white balance, your photo style, your ISO. You can see what your resolution and frame rate is. You can see how much longer you've got on your recording media. You can see your time code. You can see what your sensor's doing, whether you're in manual, what your exposure is, and you can monitor your audio all from this display. Is probably the coolest thing that I've ever seen on a hybrid camera. I love every piece of this. And if you're like me and you use an iPad or you use some external control to control the camera, you do have to give up the ability to see yourself to use this, but you could always monitor yourself with an iPad, with like a Ninja 5 that we're recording the display with, and then you can use this bright, beautiful screen to see all of this information. This is incredibly powerful. And this is kind of like a two-parter tip and trick. The next part is probably the coolest. Each of these buttons is touch enabled. So you can tap, oh, I wanna change my shutter angle because I've got a cool creative thing I wanna do. You can do that. You can tap the iris and change the aperture. You can change your white balance, your photo style. You can change your ISO, but it's not like all those things are cool, right? Well, you can also change your audio gain. You can change what your resolution is. You can change everything. You can tap everywhere on here and change every piece of that. I love. The problem we're gonna run into is there will be some hyperbole because of how much I'm a fan of this camera. And I'm not sponsored by Panasonic, but this little simple things like this, and there's a few more that I can't wait to talk about, but it's little simple things like this that make using the camera insanely easy. And that's, like for me, for other online creators, like that's the key. Like you have to be able to smooth out workflow, and things like this really help. But so we'll go around here and we'll talk about some of my tips and tricks if you're new to like a Panasonic camera, or if this is your first like video centric camera. So we talked about shutter angle, right? So 180 degree, like that's the shutter angle rule, right? So you want your shutter speed to be twice your frame rate. So we're recording in 30 frames per second. The shutter speed should be 1/60th. But with shutter angle, if you just keep it on 180, you're always good. So whether I change to 4K 60, whether I change to 1080p 120, no matter what I change to, if I keep the shutter angle at 180, I will have the proper motion blur. And that's the first thing. If you're moving to a video camera, that's the first thing I would change. The next thing I want to talk about is the photo style. So Vlog is probably the most powerful and one of my favorite. It is my new favorite picture profile of any camera ever. For me, it used to be Canon C-Log was my favorite. If you've ever heard of Vlog, because it kind of gets like a bad rap in the online camera sphere, most people are probably talking about the Vlog L inside of the GH5, which we are actually recording on right now, and it works okay. This Vlog is the Vlog from Panasonic's professional VariCam line. This is insane. This is so good. If you're outside, you get dynamic range for days. You don't really have to worry about highlights. You don't have to worry about shadows. You get so much out of this, and you can push this, especially when you use the higher end codecs inside of this camera. It's crazy. But again, to complement this, if you're gonna shoot in Vlog, the next tip is go to the Panasonic, we're gonna overlay this right here because I don't have the Panasonic website in front of me right now. Go to the Panasonic website, download the 33 VariCam LUTs. Those make grading this so much easier. A lot of companies I find have problems putting out their own official LUTs. Canon are probably the worst in my experience. But with these, the one that I've been using the most often is called the Nicest. They've got like aggressive, nicest, they've got a lot of like colored LUTs. But all you have to do is overlay that LUT, and that's it. The Nicest is the best skin tones I've ever seen on a camera. I don't even have to do much after that. I'll do a little bit of exposure adjustments. Maybe I'll add some saturation if I'm really feeling like I need some punch. But Vlog, don't be afraid of it. Do not be afraid of the Vlog inside of the S1H, because here's another feature. The next tip is a feature that makes Vlog everyday dad proof. Like I say it at the beginning, if I can figure it out, you can figure it out. This is how you do it. So let's go back to the menu. So there's a feature inside of this camera called the Luminance Spot Meter. So what this does, here, we will set it over here. We'll use the GH5's display to kind of show what I'm talking about. So what Luminance Spot Meter does is it's a little box that you can put anywhere on the screen, and it will tell you what your exposure needs to be to get perfect exposure. So if you're using Vlog, and we are in Vlog right now, if we're using the monitor for the GH5, we are 1.3 stops overexposed. So let's say it was a light, I would just drop the light, I would drop the ISO. Once that hits 0, you are good. Like you are good to go with exposure. And that's really nice. A lot of times the problem that I have with log files as a newbie colorist, I don't exactly always know how to expose it because every log profile exposes differently. S-log exposes differently than C-log, than V-log, then N-log, then F-log. All the logs expose differently. So if you're coming to the first time with Vlog, Luminance Spot Meter, put it over the skin tone that you want to expose correctly. It will do that for you. What? Like I was just saying about ease of use, this is so good. Okay, we're calming down, I found this just by going through all of the menu settings, and I will always have this enabled on the S1H. And you're like, everyday dad, how do you know what the camera can do? I'm glad you asked, other me. Here's the next tip. Let's say you're going through this very, very feature-rich menu system. I mean, look at all this stuff. Like, who knows what any of this does? Like, you walk by, you're like, okay, Luminance Spot Meter. I don't know what that does. All you have to do is hit the display button, and it tells you what every feature inside of this camera can do. So it displays the luminance level of the indicated area. That's really nice to know. That's so good. And then you can do that with anything. So what does the shear overlay do? It displays an image selected from the memory card to overlay on the live view. It's just like, look, little things like that. Little things like the touchscreen monitor that we saw in the beginning, the Luminance Spot Meter, all of these features make the S1H not only a powerful camera, but an easy camera. Like, I can't think, I've used cinema cameras, I've used cheap cameras, I've used expensive cameras. This is the first camera that really helps you dial itself in. I mean, all of these features, there's hundreds of features inside of this camera, and you get to know what all of them do. Blinking highlights, white saturated area flash in black and white. I love it. This is so good. My next tip is not really inside of the camera, but it's something that if you're gonna use a Panasonic video camera, the GH5, the GH5S, the S1, the S1H, or the S1R, you have to buy the DMW XLR1. That's actually how we're recording the audio for this video right now. Here, I'll show you. It is, I can't physically show it to you because we're using it, right? We gotta use it, but you can see it here on the GH5. It's this little box and it just plugs straight into the hot shoe mount of your camera, and it gives you two 48-volt phantom power XLR adapters without any additional cables, without any additional batteries, without any other mess. It plugs straight into the camera, and you can manage it with the manual control dials on the side of the device. That gives you so much power when it comes to audio, because especially if you're an online content creator, video quality is only so good. Like, it's only so good. You might be watching this video even though it's shot in 4K, you might be seeing it in 720p on your iPhone or your Android phone or your cell phone or some TV. Good audio is way more important. So let's talk about what my actual favorite feature is. And I catch a lot of flack for this whenever I talk about this, but this is no kidding. I will always have a Panasonic camera in my arsenal because of this, and it's called the 4K live crop. What that does, if you're new to certain Panasonic cameras, it takes the 4K image of the sensor, right? And then you can pick two 1080p boxes in it, and it will then do a pan or a tilt in it. So I've got that set to the ISO button, but you see, you can zoom in or out, you can do a pan, tilt, or a zoom. You just pick the start, you pick the end, you hit record, and then it does it all internal to the camera. Yes, you lose like the parallax of actually moving it, but as somebody that makes a lot of online content and I need a lot of B-roll, this is so good. So with this 24-105 lens and this camera in this one specific spot, with the ability to pan, tilt, or zoom, I could get every piece of B-roll I want without ever needing to move the camera. And that, like, we got algorithms, right? That YouTube algorithm is like, right now, it's standing on my neck like, everyday dad, you better get this video out. And I'm like, algorithm, I got it. We'll get it. And a tip a trick, I guess, that I wanna mention, maybe you don't know this, maybe you do know this, the battery charger that I kind of complained about during the unboxing is like the 5 pieces, right, to charge the battery. Well, if you unplug that last piece, you can power the S1H while it's in use with the provided USB-C cable. That's something my GH5 can't do. The G9 can do it. This works through the USB-C port where you can power the camera while it's in use. You don't have to buy a dummy battery. You don't have to buy additional junk. It just works with all of the cables inside of the camera. I really, really like that. So my next tip is, if this is your first Panasonic camera, you may not be aware, if you wanna use this to take stills, there's a certain feature inside of Panasonic cameras that you should probably enable. It's called constant preview. So you can see I've already got it turned on. Well, let's use that fancy display to find out what it actually does. Preview the aperture and shutter speed effects on the recorded image. So what that actually means is, let's come over here, let's put it into manual video mode, or let's put it into manual photo mode. So if you don't have constant preview on, it will just show you what the camera wants to show you. So we turned it off, let's turn off that. There, it will show you like an easier way for you to see what is coming out of the camera. But you have to have constant preview on to actually see what your picture will turn out to be. So this, if I take this picture, this is what it will look like. When the constant preview is off, it is what the camera wants me to see because it thinks that will make it easier to take the picture. But that's not what the final picture is gonna look like. So I always, always, always have constant preview turned on. And something that's different in the S1H than is different on the GH5 is in the S1H, to get all of the powerful video modes, like to do 6K, or to get the 5.9K options, you actually have to be in the MOV format. So on the GH5, it's one of the MP4 codecs that will give you access to all of its high end. But here, you've got to be in MOV so that you can get access to all, I mean, look at all this. So you can get access to the 6K, the 5.9K, any of it. If you're only in MP4, you're actually pretty limited in what it will show you. Like, you can do up to 4K 10-bit 60p, you do 4K 8-bit 30p, but it doesn't have the big, beefy, powerful options inside of the camera. You gotta have it in MOV. Let's talk about one of the other amazing features. So a lot of cameras these days have crop mode. So the A7 III that's recording us right up here, this has a crop mode inside of it. They'll let you go from full frame to APS-C and vice versa. So you can use a lot of different lenses, or you can use one lens in very versatile ways. But the way that the S1H does it that's even better is it has full frame, it has Super 35, and it has pixel to pixel, which you can kind of see how it zooms in. So full frame, you get the full width of the sensor. Super 35, it crops in like on every other camera, but the pixel to pixel is almost like a micro four thirds part of the sensor. So what this does, why would you want to buy a full frame camera to use like a teeny part of your overall sensor? Well, if you have one prime lens, this gives you 3 focal lengths out of it. And that's without any kind of like digital zoom or any kind of like cheating on the sensor. So the next tip is almost every single button on this camera can be customized to however you want it. You don't have to look for like a specific function button. You don't have to look for like a specified custom button. Everything on here, just about, can be customized. So to do that, you come over to function button set. You can choose it either in record mode or play mode. But then look at this. You can change almost every button on this camera. Like, how crazy is that? Like, not a lot of camera companies or a lot of camera brands will let you change everything. So I've got the ISO button set to that 4K live crop mode I was telling you about before, and I've got the exposure compensation button set to Wi-Fi so that I can use it with my iPad to control it. Like, that's so great. You can look at all this stuff that you can change. Almost every darn button on this camera is a free-for-all that you can customize. This is your, like, when you buy an S1H, it is your camera. It's not Panasonic's camera. Yours is not even the everyday dad's camera. This is your camera to optimize as you see fit. How awesome is that? And then the last tip, the last trick that I really want to mention is if you want to use that 1080p at 180 frames per second slow motion inside of this camera, Panasonic does it a little bit different. So the way Panasonic does slow motions, they have what's called variable frame rate mode. So you get to that over here, come up to recording, variable frame rate. Now you see it's not available here. So the tip is you gotta pay attention to your resolution and frame rate on which one actually allows for variable frame rate. So if you want that 1080p, 180 frames per second, you gotta come down to full HD at 30p at 8-bit. So you see right here, 1080p, 30p, 8-bit, or you could do 24 frames per second too, but that's gross. You see that it says VFR available in movie mode. So we come over here, we have that enabled, then we can go to variable frame rate where we can set it to, look at all this, 2 frames per second, 15, all the way up to 180 frames per second. Now you do get cropped, you can't do full frame over 150 frames per second. You see that at 165 and 180, it will crop into Super 35 mode, but to have the ability to use those variable frame rates, you do need to be in specific resolutions and frame rates. So those are right now, those are all of my tips and tricks for getting the most out of the Panasonic S1H. Again, I am blown away by how good this camera is. I've never gotten as good of video quality on any camera I've ever used as I get out of this thing, and I love this camera. But what are some of your tips and tricks? If you've got an S1H or you use Lumix cameras, what are some things that you use that could help out the rest of us? And leave those in the comments below. I love to hear how everybody customizes or everybody gets the most out of their cameras. If you liked this video, I bet you liked the one where I compare this to the GH5 in like a family battle royale, Fortnite kind of a thing, I guess. And you can find that video by clicking here. Click, 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 click. Thanks for watching.